We're looking at the facilitative mediation process. So we wanted to look at what is it that we're wanting to do in facilitative mediation, where it fits into the spectrum, why it works. So we got alignment. If some of the things I'm talking about are different to the way you were originally trained, please stop me and let's explore that. So the spectrum has more options, but the evaluative end of the spectrum, where it's more around facilitated negotiation in some ways, often lawyer facilitated, often lawyers involved. And so it's a lot around the facts and the law. In the facilitative mediation, we're really looking at the interaction between the people. There might be the context where what's going on in terms of the legal context is relevant, but it may not be. It may be that it's more of an interpersonal dispute. Getting down into that is part of the role, and facilitative mediation is the centre point and what the AMDRAS standards are based on. Then we've got transformative and narrative and all sorts of other ways where it's less structured and much more about the interpersonal side of things. So just to give a bit of context there, the roadmap, notice of dispute, even in the facilitated conversation sort of stuff you do, Diane, there'd be still pre-mediation or discussions with people, and sometimes that's kind of all that's needed, or sometimes it'll go off into another process at that point, perhaps an investigation, what have you. Sometimes are there other people that need to be involved, and then we get to the process of mediation. In that workplace context, particularly, we need to be very mindful of our confidentiality, what we're going to report or not report. And then sometimes there's follow-up and other systemic interventions. This is one of the models that we use to try and explain the time. Resolution Institute uses a diamond. I'm not sure what you used at College of Law, Ronald, but this is what our assessors are expecting to see. So mediators opening statements, setting the scene, expectations, and explaining the process, being very clear about the confidentiality. Parties opening statements, really facilitating understanding the issues. Some of the areas that people can go wrong is they can get too investigative and dig down too deep. So we're skimming like a rock skimming across the surface, just asking enough to understand what the issues are, checking in with the parties through our report and speech summaries, and then checking, are there any more? No. And then moving on to the next person and using our final summaries. And then the agenda, it's really important there that we're being clear to both parties of why we're choosing the agenda items and setting the language so that it's a guide through the mediation, not guessing what the solutions are we think it's going to be. We'll have a look at the detail on that. The second part of the mediation is exploring those perspectives, needs, interests, and then options for resolution. We're looking at a cycle of each agenda item, what's led up to it, a bit of history, what's going on now, and then getting the parties to look at their options, trying to make sure that we don't jump straight into option generation, which can be the temptation. If we can get people to see each other's perspective on what's led up to things, it's generally a much better mediation. At some point in assessments, you need to demonstrate your skills at doing private sessions. You will have a private session, usually keep them about 10 minutes each. And we want to be really balanced there and using them for checking in, option generation, and being very confidential. Out of that, we want to do negotiation. This is where we're taking some of those options, maybe they've refined them in the private sessions, and now we're helping the people to reality test them. Are they realistic? Are they something they're willing to actually commit to doing? Workable? And can they do them? That's where we're teasing them out. I tend to think if we can break an agreement before it's even made, it's not strong enough. We can stress test a little bit. With the agreement writing, we're wanting to see that you're helping the people write. So you're a scribe rather than the agreement writer, and getting the parties to dictate in their own words However, the way we ask the questions is making sure that it is a decent agreement. So who's going to do what and when, and what if you can't do that? What are the contingencies? What if it breaks down? How are you going to resolve any disputes? Does it need a check-in? All of that we can control with our questioning. And then just final step, closing off. So any questions or comments about that? Is that all pretty straightforward, or?
The only thing, it's number 7, which put like, because how I did it the other way
Yeah.
was that, and it put me off when I was doing my practice. Like,
Yeah.
we told them that we would draft the agreement for them based on the information.
Yeah.
Well, what I picked on and what's the confounder explains, they tell you is in their own words. You help them write the agreement,
Yeah.
and then you marry it together.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's probably a bit of a distinction, because College of Law is a little bit more lawyer focused.
Yeah.
And so they think, oh, we'll do a better job. But it's not so much about that. It's really about getting it in words that the clients understand. But we can't just write down what they've said without a little bit of testing, because sometimes they won't tell you in a way that's, oh, we're going to meet each week. When are you going to meet? How are you going to meet? Yes, we're using their words, but we're also checking in to try and get it into something that's still coming from them, but using our knowledge to get it into something that's useful. The other thing where we can go wrong is we can fall in a pattern where one person's dictating the agreement and forget to check, to write it down, and then forget to check with the other person, or do you agree with that? So that's another thing where we can get it wrong if we're the stronger person or whatever, and then the other person's working with them and the other one's like, oh, where is the release this after all? Yeah. So,
I didn't witness one, so correct.
even though it feels a bit repetitive, because sometimes one is more articulate or more engaged, we have to keep the other one engaged. Because one of the things that's really critical in this style of mediation, well, actually in any style of mediation, is self-determination. So we need to make sure that people are agreeing to what we're writing. That's good. What about the exploration? Taking time to find out what's led up to that. Is that the way you were taught as well? Or?
We went through the exploration. Based on what you just explained, this is real mediation. The other one was more of a conciliatory focus, where we were given leeway to ask questions to try and probe. And if someone wasn't forthcoming, we'll go in, be direct, and try to get them to speak to each other, but also follow up. But at least this one allows the parties to talk to each other. Then you can politely jump in and bring them back to the main point if they're digressing, rather than you asserting yourself, questioning them and trying to get them to speak.
Yeah, absolutely. So we want to redirect them back to speaking directly, and they don't like to. Even role players don't want to. They'll try and talk to you as the mediator. So we have to use our language, and that's pretty universal, because they've had hard words, or even in a role play, they fall into that pattern. Once we get into that exploration phase, that's where we start doing our reframes, where we're listening for what's the important bit, what's the needs, what's the interest that they're expressing. They may be saying it badly, they may be saying it in a way that the other person can't hear. That's where we can take a little bit of the ammunition out, but get the message across so that they can have a productive conversation. We definitely don't want to be doing reframes in the party's opening statements. We're just trying to collect the information. Sometimes people get that confused and they start reframing. These are rough little table of the process skills and then the facilitation skills that we want to see in each stage. The process skills is making sure that we're providing the information. In the real world, you probably cut down on this a little bit, but in the assessment, we want to make sure that you're explaining it right. And you don't cut down on it completely in mediation. It's still an important part that you should be doing. And getting their agreement to proceed, getting their agreement to ground rules if you're using those, about speaking respectfully, using first names, that type of thing. A big part of it is establishing rapport, establishing your control over the process, making sure people are engaged. in the party's opening statements. Sometimes people will say that the person who's asked for the mediation goes first. I prefer to get them to negotiate it because that way I can see how they negotiate. I just invite who'd like to go first. Someone will eventually, and sometimes they have a little standoff. Just remember to check with the other person. What we're looking for in an assessment is that you're even-handed. Or if someone jumps in, you check with the other person. And framing it, so we want to understand what the issues are for the agenda. We don't want to dig in deep. We don't want to get other people's perspective. What do you think the others thought about that or anything like that? And we want to establish our control over the process. So if people try to interrupt, just as gently as you can to get the outcome. So we don't be the cranky teacher and tell them off. So just make a note of that. And yeah. So active listening and clarifying questions are the main tools we're using at that point. By active listening, we mean really listening for content, but then checking in that we've understood. Using your little summaries and that sort of thing. Using your clarifying questions to make sure that you've understood. We have to be really careful to use reported speech. So we'll say something. Ronald, you said that you felt really disrespected in the way Di treated you, rather than saying Di treated you really disrespectfully. If we said something like that, Di's going, what? Now you've believed him and oh, now it's on. She's just waiting for her turn to get stuck in. But if we say, you said that you felt, so I have to be really careful to use our reported speech, particularly during this because the other one's muted. They can't speak. And so it can really set things off if the mediator looks like they're believing what's been told to them. My preferred approach is to use little mini summaries for part of my active listening to make sure I'm understanding, and then a summary with each party before moving on. I know that some other training, they do move to the other person, then do a summary of both. Is that the way you were taught, Ronald? Or?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, that's how we were told to go through, listen through the statement.
Yeah.
And then after summarize, after both, you've clarified with them, but also like how you, and I like the way you brought it, like you invite them to negotiate who goes first. Initially, we were told we let the party go first.
Yeah.
And then take it from there.
We don't know at this stage because I haven't really talked much. So I find it easier to finish a summary with party, then we move on to the agenda because you do a summary at the end, then the other one, like it often falls into they start talking and we don't want you to talk yet. We're doing the agenda. It's not wrong. It's taught that way as well, but I just think it's harder to manage. Yeah, my preference is keep each party's opening statement discreet. Move on. Hey, Reba, welcome. We're going through facilitated process.
Yes, hi, Joanne.
Some of the mentors might say to you, you've got to sell the agenda. The way I think of it is we want to explain it before we put it up, because if you write your agenda in the background and you put it up, they're busy reading and they're probably not listening to you. So we want to explain to them why we've chosen the agenda items. What do we mean by neutral language? Do you think? Like it's a bit of a strange term, neutral language.
I think neutral language is just being able to frame the questions. For example, Ronald, you said this, rather than going, did she say this? Just saying, Ronald, I had you say this, is that true? Rather than being direct or trying to prove them, just being neutral, reporting back to what they said, rather than trying to insinuate or making up stuff that she thinks what to say.
Yeah, absolutely. We definitely don't want to make up stuff. If they've talked about being disrespected, they mightn't have used those words exactly, but they said, oh, no, acknowledge me. You both talked about issues around how you're treated. So I've put up here how we work together. And that sort of encompasses some of the ways that you'll each know you feel respected. There's a scenario where the new computer system's a huge issue. We can just put in computer system. So rather than training for the computer system, which is our mind read of what needs to happen. So keeping it I think of it as chunking up. So we got to get it as abstract as we need to so that it works for both parties without going too extreme. The other thing we really want to see is checking in that they've understood and agreed. If someone says, oh, I want this on the agenda as well. But your agenda items, you really should have them sorted out through the opening statement. So the way I'll often do it in this type of mediation is I might divide my page in half, put one person's name on each side and just put the keywords. That could be an agenda item on each side. How do I match them up? We shouldn't be getting to the agenda and then thinking, oh, I wonder what the items should be. We should have it pretty much clear in our mind by the time we get to that. And that's sort of what we're feeding back when we're doing our little summaries and reflections in the party's opening statement. We're testing out what might be agenda items. If they say, oh, no, that's not it, that gives us a chance to see how they negotiate. So we don't order the agenda. We leave that to them. What do you want to speak about first? If we said something like, what's the most important item? We're actually setting them up for conflict because they may see different things. So we're creating something for them to try and win against the other person. And so that creates more of an argument than we need to. Yeah, just really, what order would you like to discuss them in? We don't want to put any criteria on that. Does that make sense? Yeah. Yeah, so mutual and neutral. We want to make sure that it's relevant to both. And that can be a real problem if party B talks about something the other one didn't mention. And so we've got to get a little bit creative in saying the issues around blah were mentioned. It seems like it's something that impacts you both. So I'm going to put X up on the board rather than saying, Ronald brought this up. It introduces, and not this Ronald's thing, but something that'll impact you both, which tends to get past that resistance. If it's really important to Ronald, then it needs to be on the agenda. The main thing is making sure we're checking in, not letting one person dictate and forgetting to check the other one. Any questions, comments, thoughts on this page? Pretty straightforward.
Quick one. Is there a number of items that should be listed on the agenda or that is determined by the parties?
Ideally, in a simulation, we probably don't want more than 2 or 3 items. We definitely want one because otherwise you haven't really got the agenda as a tool. If people start going around in circles, we'd be able to park something and go to the next item on the agenda. If it seems like there's 5 or 7, we haven't chunked up enough. So what are these examples of? They're more likely to be examples of incidents or issues. So, okay, I'll have to get more abstract. Sometimes you could have an agenda item, and if it's really important to them, you might have a couple of dot points underneath it. You can see they're all really the same thing, but it seems really important to them that they have those things itemized. Does that make sense?
Yes. Thank you.
In a 90-minute role play, for those doing the AMDRAS, it's a 2-hour to 2.5-hour role play. So got more time to work with in real life. 2 to 3 hours is generally what this style of mediation would run for. Yeah, 2 to 3.
Yeah, generally.
So you can't,
It will get too tight.
and you can't have too many items, or you just people satisfied because they feel like they did not finish. But if we get abstract enough, then we can bring them all in, and hopefully they can deal with all the issues they need. And so then we want to transition. Remember these transitions between each stage. We're going to thank the parties. Great, we've got the agenda. In the online mediation, copy the shared screen and paste the items into the chat once you've got them noted. That way they're there for everyone to be able to refer to. You say, okay, we're going to move on to the exploration stage now. If you think that one person may be weaker, that's the best opportunity to give them a little bit of clean air. So it's a bit of a challenge sometimes to decide. It might be the person who speaks less articulately. If there's a hierarchy starting to play out, it's not like a failure point. If you picked the wrong one, it's not. It's just, gives you an opportunity to give them a little bit. So it may be that you're thinking, oh, that first point was something that particular person was really caught up on, so they might be the best one to start speaking. And so generally what we're wanting in that exploration is to look a little bit of the history of what's led up to it, their current perspectives, and then start looking at the future options. But we're wanting to dig down below the positions. And by doing that, they don't come out of the box saying, oh, I want this. Yeah. So does that make sense? Yeah. Sometimes mediation, I'm not sure what you were taught, but sometimes they say mediation is a future focused process and we don't dwell on the past. We don't, but in most of this facilitative mediation, there's usually going to be misunderstandings about what's happened in the past, particularly in the workplace. The thing was communication. So you might say, can you tell from your perspective when these communication issues began? That might be an opening. And then I say, oh, they're so rude. They never acknowledge me. They just come into work and I don't say good morning. And that's where you've got to start. So they may respond to that. What I've said is then Di's responded to me. So person's responded to me in the way that I'm responding. So you think, okay, can you speak directly to Di and maybe let her know how that's impacted you? How does that feel for you? Then you're going to want to start responding. So if she doesn't organically, so then you can Di, you've heard that Rowena said that she's felt really that you've dismissed her and not acknowledged her, and then that's felt really bad. Were you aware of that? How would you like to respond to that? It's lazy facilitation. If you listen, there's like, can you respond to that? Can you respond to that? Can you respond to that? And then that's it. You got to package things up a little bit and help focus people. That's what we're talking about reframes as well. Really looking at directing them and also redirecting them. Sometimes people kind of try and respond to the easy bit, not the hard bit. And we might have to redirect them or make a note and then bring them back. It's been a great conversation. Rowanna said that it had really impacted her confidence in coming into work. Can we just go back to that? If you think something was really important, don't feel worried about bringing it back into the conversation if you need to. Sometimes people jump straight into trying to get solutions. So we want to try and get understanding first before we start brainstorming. But if people start going in circles, we need to facilitate either parking something or ideally starting to look at options. Does that make sense? Any questions about that? That exploration, option generation, we've joined them together. Rima, if you've got any questions, feel free to jump in. When we're talking about using a facilitative approach, not an evaluative one, we really do need to ask open questions. So we don't want to use our questions to kind of herd people towards our solution, which can be tempting. Being comfortable with them taking the top minute to come up with an idea. And for any way, get really stuck. Private sessions can be an option where we can reach this a little bit more. So, yeah, I guess just be relaxed about the process and trust the process that'll get people to where they need to be. As I said before, you need to demonstrate private sessions. After all of points on the agenda have been discussed, that's where you'll call a private session. In the real world, sometimes you need to call them earlier. Someone might be getting upset, or maybe usually it's if someone's getting upset or someone's acting out a little bit, you might decide you're going to call a private session. You don't want to be telling people off and embarrassing them. So it's better to go to private sessions and say, hey, you said you were committed to this mediation and that's not what I'm seeing in some of the behaviour. What's going on? Had that sort of conversation at times if I really had to. If someone looks, I'm thinking, why are you here? You're just really closing down everything, and that can be really helpful to have that conversation, but it wouldn't be very helpful if you did it in front of the other person. But generally, in a role play, it's usually going to be after you've done a bit of exploration of all of the items. Maybe there's some things out on the table that gives you more to talk about than in the private sessions. Generally, it's good to just start at confidentiality before you remind them the private sessions are confidential. I won't be discussing anything between them. Just remind them that at the beginning of the private session. Good question is really just start with how's it going for you? Because sometimes you can think it's going really badly. And they say, oh, this is great. It's the best conversation we've had for ages. Then start teasing out the things you don't need to do. It depends on the context. If someone's pretty stuck, you might say, if you can't reach agreement here today in mediation, what's going to happen? What's the future hold if things can't be sorted out? Sometimes we can talk over things. Once we ask a question like that, just give them time to think. Some people take longer to think and we can crowd them. Maybe check whether that's meeting their expectation. We don't want people to be pushed through. reality testing. So we can start reality testing now. Is that practical? Is that something you think you can really do? Sometimes if they're really stuck, if you had a magic wand, what would be the solution? They can limit themselves in what they imagine could be possible. You can use that in joint session as well if people seem really stuck. Sure, now the foot. How do you think the other person would respond to that if they're coming up with new ideas? Hi, Rima. Did you have a question or a comment?
No, that sounds good. Yeah.
Good. And then assisting to bring back. So just asking if they've come up with new ideas, asking them, are you comfortable with that? How are you going to do that? You might help them. Well, how do you think you might say that? You can give them a little bit of a coaching thing. So sometimes people get tempted to bring in their own ideas. Generally, you wouldn't be needing to do that in a role play. Usually there should be enough there. In the real world, if you really get someone who's stuck, try not don't come up with one solution and you're going to get yourself in trouble. So if it doesn't work, the mediator said we should do this. If you really feel like we're not going to get anywhere, come up with 3 things. Some of the things I've seen in other mediations, even if you haven't, and any of that, give you an idea. At least that way they can build on something that's not your idea. You don't want to end up with a complaint because the mediator said I had to do this and then I went to crap and that's their fault. People in conflict are often quite looking for people to blame if things don't go right. So avoid that. Definitely put it in a demonstration of your skills in an assessment. But even in real life, it's risky. It can be tempting if someone brings up something and you want to the other role play person, if you bring in a question out of nowhere that relates to what the other person's raised, the assessor's going to look at that and say, oh, that's breaching confidentiality. Because question that's got nothing to do with anything that's been discussed beforehand for a party to in a private session, it's what did the other person say? So yeah, just resist. You should resist in real life as well. If the other person's going to bring that up, it can come back in the negotiation stage. If assisting in option generation, do so in a way that sort of supports self-determination. That's what I was talking about before. And again, sometimes we provide evaluative language without realizing, like you might say, I think that's a really good idea. What we want to say is, how do you think that would work? Right? As a mediator, we don't actually need to do very many I statements. We want to take it back to them. How do you think that will work? What do you think the other person might say to that proposal? Questions, comments, or we move on to the third part?
Question. If you come back from the private session and no one wants to say anything, all this tension, and you invite them back to share whatever if they wish to, they just go quiet. Would you then jump in and refer back to the agenda and try to steer them to the agenda, or would you then summarize and pack it?
Generally going back to the agenda, unless you went to the private sessions really on top of something, you can go back to that. It's usually safer just to go back to the agenda. So where were we up to? Point A, if there's an option that they were considering on the table, where are you at with that? You talked about blah, blah, blah. Any ideas to move this forward, or is this something that you're willing to commit? Look at early on, if they're coming up with options that they seem to like, then you say, I'll make a note of that and we can revisit that further on. Let's look at the next agenda item. If they didn't have anything for it, then you can say, let's look at this first agenda item. Do you have any suggestions? We don't want to go somewhere that might look like you're decided you're going to bring it back from the private session. So that's the safest way to do it.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, so without using that confidential things, generally there'll be some, unless you've ended up with a really polarized mediation, and sometimes people if you have a bad agenda, like your agenda is biased or you've created conflict at that point, it generally runs its way through the mediation and you're working really hard the whole way through. As an assessor, you're looking in the background and thinking, oh, you went inside of yourself. So you can get there, but ideally, if we can start with a nice neutral agenda, we give people the time to explore things, really give them the option to generate options and talk about why it might or might not work without pressure to think that they've got to lock something in. Then you've got time to debrief and reflect during the private session. They're usually going to be in a state of mind to start putting together things. So this is where with a negotiation, we're trying to get a collaborative negotiation. So we want to be talking about interests, talking about their needs. If they've talked about things that really mattered to them, like respect or whatever, this might be where we're getting some clarity around that. How would you know? What would that look like? Can you share with each other? Are these things that you'd like to commit to?
A quick question.
Yeah.
So, you know how you do the private sessions, you do party A and then they wait the 10 minutes while you do party B.
Yeah.
What happens if party A in that 10 minutes makes a totally different thing to what you had discussed in that first place?
Oh, yeah, it can happen. They might phone a friend or they just go with it. They're not doing it wrong. They're just doing it different. When you bring back, you really want to give a little bit longer than feels comfortable for them to speak. Thank you. So that was to private sessions. Is there anything either of you would like to bring back? Okay, no problems. Let's go back and have a look at that first agenda item. But usually people will come up with something because it's the violence, they'll fill it. But yeah, just go with it. Okay. Can you explain? And so let's say, oh, I think we should do X. Can you explain to the other person a little bit more what you mean by that? Do you have any questions about that? What do you think? One of the things is people are often really reactive to proposals and they jump in and just say no because they haven't had a chance to think about it. It's a high conflict strategy, but it's a good strategy for anything. Just slowing it down, giving them a chance to ask questions, to think about what is it, what does it mean, how would that work, before they need to actually say whether they agree or not. If they get say no, and that's reality testing, clarifying. So we use a SWC acronym. Would it solve the problem? Is it workable? So do they have the resources, the skills, the knowledge, the approval to do it? Are they committed? And if it wasn't workable, is there anything that could make it workable? If not, what would work? So that's the facility, the negotiation that we want to see. So sometimes people rush straight into trying to document things in an agreement, but if you tease it out, it'll be the agreement writing stage is pretty much a lay down misere if anyone's ever played 500. I had card playing grandmothers. We want to generally try and use the agenda to ensure that all the addresses are addressed. And refunds and perspective taking. So sometimes you can You might use time, you might use, if you're not sure, is it possible to trial it for a period of time? So we can bring in suggestions like that because they're like a reframe rather than, so that can be a good way if people are uncertain about committing to something. Once we get onto those agreements, confirm what they want. What we're expecting is that you'll get the parties to dictate. So you write down on your piece of paper or whatever, but generally not on the agreement document. You don't type it on and then just hold up. Here's your agreement. Do you need to change anything? That wouldn't be what you do in facilitative mediation. So just have your sheet of paper. Hopefully your writing's legible enough that you can know what you wrote down. And then say, okay, it seems like you had agreement about this. How would you like that worded? And they'll start dictating and you type it down. The beauty of this is you're doing it onto a shared document, so you can easily change, amend it. If you were doing it in real life on a whiteboard, you can rub it out. Flip chart paper, not so easy, but usually people are got at least a whiteboard these days. But yeah, who's going to do what and when? If there's, and that depends on the context. They don't necessarily need everything written down. You should really be reminding them of context. So if it's a workplace scenario that you're doing, generally there's an assumption that work's going to get a copy of the agreement. You might remind them about that at that stage and say, as I said in the beginning, work's asked to know whether you made a genuine effort and any agreement that's been agreed. So if they say, oh, we agree we're going to treat each other with respect now, is that something you need written on your agreement? And it's okay if they say no, that's okay. And then close. It's just a final summary of the progress, any steps, or how the agreement's going to be shared, checking in. Do you want to have a check-in session or anything like that? So it's just closing. It should only be a couple of minutes, but finish the agreement and there's, oh, okay, all right, we're finished now. You've got to do a little bit of closing it up. Any other questions on this page?
Just have a question. When we do the note keeping, I understand that at the end of the mediation, we need to just get rid of those. But we can still keep the paperwork for the pre-mediation, right?
And yeah, we should keep our pre-mediation in our intake document. And yeah, agreement, if an agreement's been reached. And generally in mediation, we don't keep like our scratch notes. You just have to dispose of them in a good way.
And do we need to tell them? Do we need to inform the parties as well?
And generally the confidentiality, you might notice me making some notes. I'll dispose of those. Mediation. You can keep a file note if needed, just to cover yourself. That's recommended. So we don't have to destroy our notes. We just have to. So we're not going to say everything's going to be destroyed to the client if we're not going to destroy it. We have to just tell them the truth.
Right. Yep.
Yeah. But I'll keep any records of the mediation in secure location. We keep it on a
Okay. Of course. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
good question.
I know it's a very tricky one. That's
Oh, we destroy everything.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because sometimes we offer them to come back after 4 or 5 weeks, and then we need some kind of background.
Absolutely. Particularly if you're in private practice. Like run a good business. Non clients, how things going. And you want to have at least an outline of a file so that you know who they are.
Absolutely.
And I don't know what the follow-up is in your situation, but certainly in internal services, there's often some sort of follow-up. So that's just the thing we haven't really, that's not really relevant for now. It goes through the professional domains. So there's expectations regardless of the type of mediation, the facilitation skills that you'll do. And we've talked about them: active listening, summaries, reframes, reflections, reported speech. I didn't really talk about in respectful interruption, but that's a skill that we need as mediators sometimes as well, because you can get someone who just talks. And so we need to have a way that we're comfortable with doing so. Can I just stop you there? Or look, sorry to interrupt, or whatever feels comfortable for you. You've talked about a whole lot of things there. I'm just worried that it's too much information. So I'll just check in with the other person. So that might be an exploration if there's someone who's just saying too much, or even the private sessions. We don't want to be overusing it. Like, we don't want to be stopping them from talking and just constantly interrupting. So be mindful of that. In assessment, they can assess you if you're just sitting back and watching, because you're not demonstrating any skills. Sometimes you get role players that get caught up and start negotiating and you don't get you might have to interrupt them. In the real world, sometimes people try to dominate the time. They think that's going to give them an advantage, and you have to interrupt them to give the other person time for it to be a fair process. So it is a skill. Do you have a phrase you use? Huh? Or your people are pretty good?
Most because a lot of my work at Part A. So you've done a lot of work at that point, and the intervention going to work or it's not going to work. And then when you get to Part B, they've had time to think about it. So it's slightly different. But yeah, I mean, that's why it's good to go to these sort of things to think what I use.
Are you mainly working face to face? Yeah. Or
Probably more virtual, but only just, it's maybe 50-50.
yeah, because sometimes if you're in person, you can just use your body language. You can give a look and then slow down and go, okay.
That's right.
Absolutely. The key takeaways is review and understand the process. If you're sitting for assessment, look at the assessment tool, make sure you understand it. If you don't understand anything, if you think, oh, I'm not quite sure, reach out and we can go through that specific bit. Just review back through the course material if needed. Observing is a great way to refine your understanding. Just jump on as an observer with the assessment tool and mark the person who's the mediator. It's a really good way for it to really click whether or not they did the things the way that, you'll see, oh, yeah, okay, now I get it. Because it's a lot of words, there's a lot of ideas, but ultimately we're just going through a process. Our opening statements, followed by the parties, followed by the agenda. We just need to focus on where we are, what's coming next, so that each thing links to the next one. Yeah. Questions, comments, thoughts? Helpful? Cool. Arnold, you're up for an assessment next. Right, Jeff, did that clarify any of the things that you got feedback on?
I was reading it through today and I looked at the things, and I was fortunate enough to have Mel, and she went through step by step and gave me a full analysis on each and everything I went through. It was a relief to see what mediation does and what you went through.
Yeah.
There's a difference, but not very big. But the difference is this is real mediation. The other one is more conciliation, focused on us lawyers just going in and asking the questions, not giving a lot of time talk to each other,
Yeah.
which I found that sometimes we make the jobs harder for ourselves. Rather than letting people talk to themselves, we just go in, okay, this is the issue. We understand the elements of the issue.
Hmm.
Okay. So easy, finish it. Here's the argument, move on. And so I kept being pulled back saying, oh, you've got to reframe it this way. Let them just talk to each other and then be able to guide them through. This gave me a greater foundation of knowing that let them make their own decision. It's a self-determination. They are there. Let them say what they need to say
Yeah.
and agree on it.
Absolutely, because they're the ones that got to live with the agreement. And it's an arrogance to think that we know better. But
Yeah.
how could we possibly? We've known these people for 3 hours. It doesn't matter what studies or when they're the experts in their life, their conflict, their experience. So I think it's helpful for us to see ourselves as facilitating them through a process and understanding each other a little bit more, clearing up misunderstandings, and then helping them to work towards a really solid agreement.
The structure is very important. Mediation is very important to have that structure and not to assume they understand it.
Yeah.
Talk about it. Let them talk about it and they follow back. Structure is very important. That helps with the structure.
It makes it so much easier. Who's going to do what and when, as where and how. Those little tools give us a little bit more structure so we don't get lost. When you look at the mediation process, there's so much psychology built into it. There really is. And that's why it's very important to follow the process, because it takes people on a journey. Otherwise, they can just be still stuck where they started. And whoever's got the most power is going to get the better outcome.
Yeah, there's a classic, like a lot of people, you've got a structure around it, but it's not being controlled.
Letting go of the control is really hard, legally qualified. Lawyers are taught not to ask a question you don't know the answer to. Are you a lawyer, Ronald?
Yes.
So you're taught to control the narrative too. My husband's a lawyer, and I was horrified when he told me that I don't think we can be together, but we got past that. But and we do not have to control that, which gives us a lot more freedom. It's much less stressful because their lives, we can help them see the blind spots. We can see where they're talking across purposes because we're not part of trying to fix it. There's a lot of power in that. Yeah. So when you're ready, book in for your next assessment. You've done a practice, you go to assessment. There is a second assessment if you need to, so don't be stressed at all. It's just about, I'm sure you
I attend one the other day. I was observing, and there was a lot of power dynamics, which was a family one. And family is different from all the others.
Yeah.
A lot of direct questions that go through. There is a lot of emotions, but then you've got to probe some things to try and get the information.
Yeah.
And so dealing with the practice I did, it was a bit different going, okay, so I saw the other and the way they were going and there was a lot of probing and then this one just reframing and now to dealing with a different matter. So I was just excited to learn doing the practice knowing that, hey, not every mediation is the same. They're going to be completely different.
Absolutely. Yeah. Context really makes a difference. That's great. It's been lovely hanging out with you guys. I might, if there's any other questions or comments, we'll go and have our dinner or whatever we're going to do with our evening. Thank you.
Thank you. That was great.
You're welcome. Okay. Bye. Bye.
Thank you.